on today's StoryBeat.
Find good teachers, find mentors. I wasted probably a good 2 years. Now, it's great to do self-exploration, but at some point you need guidance, and you need to look for that guidance. And the guidance you look for, try to make it the best people that you can find.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Michael Mason, has been playing, teaching, and recording on flute for 40 years or so. He's well known for his work and performances in jazz, the avant-garde, free jazz, and world music in many styles. Michael has recorded 7 CDs as a leader of various groups and ensembles, some of them pre-nominated for Grammy Awards. Michael began his love for the flute in the early 70s upon being loaned the instrument after his collection of fine acoustic guitars were stolen from his Chicago apartment. After teaching himself how to play the flute by listening to recordings of various blues, jazz, and rock artists, Michael then trained with numerous masters of the flute, including Josef Zerov, Janice Bergman, Donald Peck, Wulfrad Kujala, William Bennet, Pierre Rampal, and James Galway. In the late 70s, Michael attended a Jethro Tull concert and luckily met Tull's lead singer, songwriter, and flute player, Ian Anderson, at a soundcheck, which turned into an ongoing sharing of ideas for a number of years. By the end of the 70s, Michael had assembled a number of progressive rock groups performing with various musicians in many different venues throughout Chicago and the Midwest. During this time, Michael's interest in jazz had begun to take over his playing and was especially influenced by saxophonist John Coltrane. Since the 1990s, Michael has continued to perform and record with many jazz, free jazz, improvised music, and avant-garde artists. Please be sure to stick around at the end of today's show to hear Michael's beautiful composition, Gates to Raga, from his CD, Human Revolution. So for all those reasons and many more, I'm honored and greatly delighted to have as my guest on StoryBeat today, the renowned flutist, Michael Mason. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Steve. Sounds good. You're sounding beautiful.
Well, the pleasure is all mine, trust me. So let's go back in time to a bit of your history. Where did your original love of music and composing and playing, where did that come from? Were you a kid when it started?
I think it was my uncle. He used to play piano. Back when I was a child, we were raised in an Italian West Side neighborhood. And right. He had piano upstairs and he had a bunch of jazz records. And he would always be playing them. And he went off to college and I'd sneak up there in his flat and always bang away at the piano, not knowing what I was doing. I was, totally whatever, just to create sound. And
you were fascinated by it, by the sounds.
Yeah. So I was about maybe 6 or 7, something like that.
So you were a little kid, really. I mean,
yeah. Did I know? I would know. But
you did not know. You did not know at that time that you would spend your life doing it.
No, not. Yeah, I wouldn't know that I would be spending 40 some years.
Well, were those records your earliest inspirations and influences, or did something come along to really set the wheels in motion?
I got interested in guitar. I was a guitarist,
right?
And that was in my, when the Beatles hit.
Okay.
Because I'm a '60s guy.
Right.
So the Beatles came into view, back in when I was 64 or something like that. And I said, hey man, that sounds cool. It's something I'd like to do. And then I got a guitar. As I got a little bit older, and I had a stepfather who bought me my first electric guitar. And I started jamming away, and we had little bands and groups and stuff, throughout the early years of high school and grade school, and just took off from there.
Was it jazz back then, or was it rock and roll, or what were you?
It was rock. It was, it was the cover tunes,
Sure.
stuff like, what the Beatles would do or the Stones or something like that. So it was basically a cover band, a sock hop type bands, back in the day. I don't know if people even know what sock hop means anymore.
Well, there probably aren't a lot of sock hops today, but that
No,
was
there isn't.
that was a big deal back then, from the 50s and 60s, where kids would go
Yeah.
to a dance and they would basically take their shoes off, so they called it a sock hop.
Yeah, it was the high school gymnasium music. So we were traveling around doing those type of things. And I grew up in an area saturated with musicians. In fact, I grew up with my, kind of playmates in the area that were, the group Chicago, Shadows of Night. The Buckinghams. All these guys lived in mostly in our region, in our area. So we'd
Right.
be, once in a while run into each other and stuff. But
Did you go to get training on the guitar, or did you just play?
no, yeah, I just was, rocking out, picking it up from whatever, and really dug it. And eventually, though, that kind of left, and I went into the acoustic area of
Right.
music.
Well, I notice there's a bit of a theme for the musicians and composers that come on this show, that many of them have some training, but in the early days they just picked some kind of instrument up and just played, and that nobody taught them how to play or didn't teach them, here are the chords, here are the notes. They just played. I think that's very interesting, because I know for me, though, I've been in the business for a while and I've had, some musical experience. I can't play an instrument. So how did you just naturally take to it like a duck to water? Is that how it worked?
It's somewhat natural. It wasn't naturally. I would be taught a few chords from one guy, pick up another lick from another guy, and and then try to base your recordings, or do these copies off of what you heard off these records.
Right.
In 45. So I would think, more imitating than.
Sure.
There wasn't any composing involved. We were just trying to get down, the licks and stuff and things like that.
Were you obsessed by it? Did you play a lot when you were in high school? Did you just practice it all the time?
I didn't practice a lot, but I was always obsessed with music.
Mm-hmm.
Just upset. I loved it. I loved songwriters and the tunes that we heard, and grew up with that stuff. So
do you think of it as a calling? Is it something that you've been, this is something you're supposed to have done, or did you just find your way to it and it's set in?
I would consider it was pushed me all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Music, go and try to get into it, find out where you belong, where do you fit in this musical society, which is, even vaster now than it was before. So.
All right. So you have this incident in which your guitars are stolen. You must have had some really cool guitars, and they're ripped off. Did a friend give you a flute? Is that how that worked?
No, I was married, had my first wife, short-lived. We moved into an apartment. I had a set of Martin guitars and a couple of Guilds. At the time, I was really getting a lot of work done in the folk rock area,
right?
That type of thing, influenced by various groups, Crosby, Stills and Nash, things like that. So I was getting pretty good, and I had a good guitar. So yeah, one day we got home, and they had broken into the apartment. And they stole the guitar. So I only had insurance, I believe, on one or two of them. And back then, I hardly even thought of insurance. But anyways, to make a long story short on it, I ended up going up to a town or a store called Soundpost Music in the Upper Lake area here, right outside of Chicago.
Right.
And I ordered a couple more guitars to replace the guitars that were stolen. And Jimmy up there, I think if I remember right, that was his name. He goes, "Hey, Mike, I got this flute for you. Why don't you bang on this for a while you're waiting for your guitars?"
Wow.
So that's what happened,
So
I took it home, and
it could have been a trombone. It could have been a flugelhorn, but instead it was a
thank God
flute.
it wasn't a trombone. But this is 60. I'm sorry, this is 74. Okay,
Right.
and you have to understand that I'm already have put together several progressive groups in the Chicago area. because of the guitar playing. So, yeah, so he loaned it to me and I started bastardizing the instrument. Again, just like the guitar, self-taught, listening to Rassan Roland Kirk, big jazz guy, multiple reedist. And then I started listening to jazz and stuff. And then I started listening to Ian out of Jethro Tull. So I was doing a lot of imitation work there.
Well, in the mid 70s, that was big stuff.
Very big.
Aqualung and various other recordings.
Yeah, very big, very big. So that's how all that kind of came about,
So your original training, as said in the bio, is just doing it, being given this gift and then just doing it.
Yeah, I would have to say not well.
Well, do you know of anybody in the history of ever who has just been good at what they did, like top pro level, just by picking it up and doing it?
I would have no. I don't know anybody. I think the flutist of the world obviously is James Galway, and that's a gift from God. Those gifts are very rare. And yes, I have a gift that was donated to me. It may not have been as thorough as Galway's, but you work with what you have.
Sure. Of course, clearly you have musical gifts if you're able to pick an instrument up and at least play it somewhat and then get better at it. That's obviously innate, because not everybody can do that. And then you had some formal training with a number of the names that I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
These were one-on-ones, or were they in classes, or master classes or something like that?
All of the above. What really happened was after I bastardized the flute, I started creating groups and writing and composing much into the progressive rock arena.
Okay.
So I was writing tunes like that, very similar maybe to Floyd and Tull and all this, and Genesis. So I was putting together these big groups. These were really good groups, and so I was bastardized. So one day I just said, you know what, I really love this instrument. I got to learn it much better than what I could be playing on it. So there was I found a guy told me about an audition at the Sherwood Conservatory of Music in Chicago.
Right.
So I go down there, and you have to bring it in a small classical piece to perform. So now I'm getting into the classical world, about ready to step in, to the big reality, so to speak.
Right.
And so I go down and I played a little piece of Mozart that I did, and I improvised it. And just sounded horrible, whatever it was. And then I did an improvisation piece that I wrote, or that I put together. Again, that sounded horrible. And I basically packed my stuff up and went home after listening to all these great players, and said, oh God, what a mistake I made, Next thing you know, about 2 weeks later, I get a call from the secretary from the Sherwood School of Music. And she says, Mike, Josef Zerov of the Chicago Lyric would like to take you on. Would you like to come out? And I said, you got to be kidding me. I said, so I was like, this can't be happening. So anyways, I said, okay, that's good. So she gave me his phone number. She says, okay, you got to call him on Friday, whatever the day was. So I gave him a call, and he said, yeah, Mike, I heard your auditions. He says, very, very different. And I knew what he was getting at, that it wasn't great, So he goes, yeah, so come on out to the house. I'm going to take you on. He says, you got a lot to learn. And I said, yeah, I know, Joseph, but man, I'm really honored that you even think. He goes, listen, he said, for the first lesson, would you mind coming out to the house? Leave your flute at home. So, really? So that's what I did. That's how I started.
What did he do in that first lesson where you didn't bring your flute? How'd that work?
He had quite a few flutes
at
his place, you know what I mean? But there was all the things he wanted to talk to me about, because he wanted to make sure that I was going to step into this arena, so to speak. After that, I brought my flute out, but then I got turned on to other classical players. And then I went into the American Conservatory of Music. That's where I had my first formal training. a full repertoire. So I went to the American Conservatory in Chicago, right on Michigan Avenue there. So I went there for a while, and a lot of great teachers. I mean, what can you say? There's probably 10 flute players there, 10 oboe players, cello players, everybody. They didn't have much of a jazz program. And at that time I was starting to get into jazz. So
Right.
I started going out on the streets to, jam with musicians and stuff and pick up the jazz world and listening to Coltrane and Davis and Rassan and all these guys. Met some guys from what we call the advancement of creative musicians. That was the avant-garde world. So I was really just blowing notes all over the place. And one day I'm walking down that hall at the conservatory going to my lesson stuff. And I listened to probably 10 flute players as I was going down the hallway. And I'm going, Jesus, there's only so many seats in an orchestra, in the United States. And I'm thinking to myself, all these people can't be getting chairs in an orchestra. What are they going to do with their lives? I'm thinking, well, you know what? I'm tired of sounding like teachers, our teachers, so to speak. And they're great teachers, don't get me wrong. I said, I got to make a voice for myself. And so I left.
And about how long do you think that you were playing the flute before you thought to yourself, you know what, I am pretty good at this. I am good enough to take this into a professional setting?
I would say, because I was still playing in some of the groups and stuff, I would say early on, by 75, 76, I'm knowing now that, this is going to be what I'm going to pursue. Starving to death, literally, but I went after it, so.
Also a theme with tons of artists is you were compelled, you were driven to play the flute. It wasn't, you were willing to starve in order to find your way to it. You weren't going to give up and become a salesman in a store or something like that. You just were going to do this.
Yeah. I mean, I was still playing guitars, while I had the flute. So I was playing both instruments in these prog groups and stuff. And then the guitars kind of drifted away, and because the flute was taking up more and more of my time, and practicing and stuff. You're talking practicing, 5 hours a day,
right?
Just to get some type of virtuosity on the instrument to, express different mediums of music, So I mean,
were you at that time trying to play classical, jazz, all sorts of different genres at the same time, or were you now focusing on jazz mainly?
When you went to the conservatories and stuff, you would have to do your juries. Basically what that was, you'd play a classical piece. I mean, I was horrible at it. I knew I was not a classical musician.
Your heart wasn't in it.
Yeah, well, I would always improvise, I mean, these very conservative teachers would just be like, "Where is he going now? It's not on the paper, man." Like, sorry.
So we have now brought up several times, including in the introductory bio, these various genres, avant-garde, progressive rock, and so on. Can you describe for the listeners who may not know, what is free jazz and what is avant-garde? What defines them, and what are the differences?
Well, first of all, I don't like tags on music in general, because there's only 12 notes, in the entire universe, right? So I would call it like, it's called the impermanence of music. Music is in a constant change of state. And so these influences, they're basically influences that are coming into me from all directions. Free jazz, if they want to call it free jazz, is that you still have to understand that, play over the changes. I don't know if you guys ever heard over that. So I think one of the earliest studies you can do is Coltrane's Giant Steps. Learn to play that and learn to improvise over these chord changes, so, but your ear at the same time is getting focused into, key signatures and pitches and things like that. So I think one of the things is free jazz is playing outside the areas sometimes of what is expected, let's say in a B flat minor seventh chord or something like that, but always returning, to the body of music or whatever music or song that you're working on. So the avant-garde, that's why they call it, I don't know why they call it, because it's a truer freedom of expression. Most of this stuff is you're improvising within the moment. You almost, what you're doing, but you don't quite know sometimes. That's the exciting part of it. You're trying to go somewhere and you're trying to take, people with you.
It's the ultimate version, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, please. It's the ultimate version of what people would call going with the flow.
Yeah. I mean, and then your audience, they anticipate this. That's the important thing about it. One thing, the attractive part about modal music, which I'm into now, and what the type of stuff I write and do, but you got to take them on a journey. But they people like that you're on the verge, on the cliffs, so to speak. Can he maybe pull this off? But, their expectations are, where are you going to take us?
Is it more important than in free jazz to have a known melody that you're then taking somewhere else? Or is it that you're coming at it with a melody that they've never heard before?
You'll write a sketch, let's say. All right. So I'll write a series of notes and I'll say, okay, guys, this is the basis of this song. It could be a bass pattern or whatever. And you start expressing it from there, and usually it involves a percussion work that's going on with it, because we establish a meter, 4/4, 9/8, 7/8, 7/12, and all of a sudden all this stuff starts to occur. Now I know what chord sector I want to take something to, and I'll tell my players, but I don't interfere with their expression and what they want to put into it. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, of course, it's probably easier for you to do as you're doing it than it is to describe it, is my guess.
And that's a good point.
I am curious, do you ever get into a piece of music, especially in live performance, and things just go haywire and you're not on the same path? Does that happen?
Yes, it does. But and we get out of it, we straighten it out within seconds, because of the versatility of the players, meaning that they practice their instruments. They have a great scale form. Something could go, but we're able to bring it back into where it belongs.
So a lot of it has to do with doing it a lot and understanding where things may or may not go. And you're sort of, I don't know whether anticipating is the right word, but it
is the good word.
Anticipating is the word. You can sense where people are going because you've either played with them before or you know what they're going to do typically under a given circumstance.
Exactly. I mean, you understand it. So, I mean, you're used to some of these idioms, and how some of these idioms work. So,
and aside from doing a lot of performing, which obviously that's what it requires, you have to be doing it a lot in order to be good enough at it to make those moves. I always equate it in my head to the football coach who, you go into a game and you've made all your game plans and you've planned everything out and still you have to punt. And and that's what it is. You've got to suddenly change direction as you're going. So aside from a lot of performing, is there anything specific you do in your day-to-day work to develop your abilities at that? Is there anything else that you do aside from playing a lot?
Playing a lot.
Playing a lot is the answer.
Yeah, I mean, just, I practice scales, arpeggiated patterns. I keep it, up on the instrument, in order to express myself. And then I'll start doing some writing, or composing. So I'll sit at the keyboard, and maybe a bass line will come to me, or a set of chords, or I'll hear something, that maybe someone else has done. And I'll go, hey, well, that sounds interesting. But I'd like to take it somewhere else, maybe. So, again, influences.
I find it interesting that a certain amount of, if I'm interpreting you correctly, that a certain amount of the compositional work you do comes out of practice. As you're practicing, something will occur to you by virtue of just noodling keys.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Or like I said, I'll come up with a bass line in 7/8 or something. I'll just go, hey man, this is a good groove. I think I'm going to express myself or expand on it. Find some chord structures that work. Put it in there. And now you have to understand, I'm dealing with an array of instrumentation now that is totally world jazz oriented. Again, I'm giving it a tag, but I'm working on hang drums here, Rob Vast drums. These are instruments that are, that are made specifically with certain tunings and modalities to them that create these sculptures.
Things that are not typically heard in American concert halls.
Exactly, but they're heard all around the world.
All around the world, sure.
Music. There's a lot of hang players. That's another instrument now that I've learned.
Where's that from? What country is that from?
The original hangs were, I believe, out of Switzerland. It's one of the newer instruments. It was developed in 2001, 2002, and they're a set of typist drum made out of steel. They're not steel drums, where you have that calypso thing going. That's nothing like that. They look like flying saucers, and they have certain tonalities on them, that create modes, and some of them are very peaceful, some of them are very Eastern, some of them are very, I can create a mood simply almost with one drum.
It sounds to me like you get turned on by new instrumentation.
Yes. Well, those that can deliver, that I can interpret, oh yeah, I mean, these drums provide a world of a field that you can play on, and improvise on.
So I have to say, when I listen to your music, one of the hallmarks for me is that I can tell that you play with passion, that it means something to you, that passion is a part of your playing. How much would you say passion is a factor in the delivery of a piece of music?
Oh, I mean, if you can't love what you do, it's going to show.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, any way you look at it, I'm blessed. I'm very lucky, that I'm able to express myself in this type of idiom. Other people express themselves as doctors and lawyers and everything else. So, but without the passion, I mean, you couldn't even get up and you can't fake this.
That's the important point. That's what I like to hear when I speak to folks about their craft, their art, and so on, is you can't do this thing called art, whatever it is, without really having a feeling for it.
There's some days, you take Jackson Pollock or somebody like that, a painter, that's, about ready to pick up a paintbrush and have 30,000 colors in front of them, and start from scratch, and say, hey, you have to be passionate. Now, is every day, are you going to wake up every day and be so impassioned? No, there are days that just aren't as creative as others. There's some days I just, got to just practice my horn just to practice it without expecting anything, just to keep my facility up.
I think you've just expressed the definition of a professional, which is a professional will continue to work on whatever it is they're working on, despite the fact that they may be uninspired at the moment.
Exactly. Oh, and there's many days, there's many days of and during this pandemic, you have to understand, I took 10 years off.
Oh, really?
Between albums. All right.
Wow.
From the latest album that came out, there's been 10 years.
Wow.
So, I don't know if they, I'm a firefighter. I've also been a firefighter for 37 years.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah. So that's something I don't talk about it much. It's only because it's, I believe in giving back. And it was my way. And by the way, firefighting saved me economically.
Mm-hmm.
You have to understand, I was starving to death playing this flute, basically. I'm on the streets, and I just happened to have a couple of guys on the Chicago Fire Department said, Mike, we think you might make a good fireman, and you could still play your flute. And hey, you're only working once every 20 or 72 hours, 24 on, 48 off. I said, well, I think I'll give it a try. So I rode with them, and I liked
Well, so I did not know that about you, and
No,
I must say thank you for your service to your community, and that's
yeah.
a great thing that you do, and something that everyone should be pleased and proud of. Do you think that firefighting has inspired the music in any way?
Well, firefighting inspired the CD called Angels of Fire.
Okay,
That's one CD I've had out. I was also a survivor of Our Lady of Angels fire.
really?
I was in that fire. I went to school there the day of at that time. So I wasn't affected, and I was not jeopardized in any way. I'm more or less a witness, to a traumatic event. My cousins, we all went to school. Again, it's Italian neighborhood, Catholic nuns, all that stuff.
Right.
Oh yeah. So yeah, that was my first exposure to a traumatic event, which just happened to be fire. I mean, it was nasty.
And I'm still curious if firefighting or being in a fire or something like that somehow works its way into what you're doing as a musician or a composer.
They say, a lot of guys will say, a lot of times people will say, hey man, is that why you went into firefighting? Is because you were at that fire, you were in that? I go, no, I don't believe at the time. There was too much of a gap. You know what I'm saying? I was too much into music. I wasn't even thinking about firefighting.
Right.
It was a couple of buddies that turned me on to it, thought I would do well in it, and I pursued it
And
in order to make a living.
well, sure, you had to, yeah, you've got to eat, as they say, and
Yeah, so
that's important.
so it's embarrassing. It's not embarrassing. I'm proud of it.
There's nothing to be embarrassed about. Everybody, I don't know, I literally don't know a single artist in the arts who hasn't had to do something to survive.
Yes, whether it's there's side jobs. Or every player I play with now, except just a handful, are doing the music full time. In other words, from day and night, that's all they do. But there's a lot of them that have side jobs and stuff
Sure.
that they have to, as much as we love what we do, we have to survive, financially. And you're not gonna survive in this world. And music's changed so much. I mean, back in the day, my last recording between albums, it's been 10 years. I'm used to recording, on 2-inch tape in a 24-track studio.
And not anymore.
Not anymore, man. I'm like, what? You mean to tell me I can have a 24-track studio and it only takes up 300 square feet? Wait a minute, that's impossible. So I'm getting turned on to all this stuff. And even what I'm dealing with, your show and everything. I Zoom. Okay, let's try it. Okay, I'll give it a shot.
It's really the whole thing, which used to take up many rooms, is now in a little box.
It's crazy.
Called a computer.
Yeah. So, it's not even the same in regards. Everything's streaming. So I'm getting used to that. Like this release, Human Revolution. Well, it's been in the I got notification from Ralph. It's been in the top 10 streaming and downloads for the last 2 weeks.
Wow, good for you.
And I'm like going, what does that mean? Ralph's going, what do you mean? What does that mean?
People are listening, Michael.
I know. So I'm laughing, and Ralph's going, man, you got to get with it, pal.
All right. So I want to talk about writing. I assume you do your own arranging, yes?
Yes. Well, yes. I got the basic ideas, and the other musicians donate their say. I don't, like I said, I keep an open field, and then things will change, which is good. Change is good. And then, without them, what you're hearing on these records, or even Human Revolution, yes, I had the general composition done. I know what the arrangement's kind of going to be, but their input makes the record as well.
So I'm going to ask a question out of my own lack of knowledge, and that is, I assume arranging is less important in free jazz than it is in playing the same piece over and over again with written notation.
Yes, in a way, yes. What we're doing here is basically I will come up with a modal mood of something. Musicians come in and they are allowed to paint over this landscape, so to speak, with their instruments, the percussion, everything. I usually have the time signatures worked out, but then everything else starts to get layered onto this stuff. You know what I mean? So now we're working together. They understand the concept that I want, what I'm trying to go for, the mood maybe I'm trying to create, but I don't interfere with their notation, some of their concepts, counterpoints, and things like that. That all doesn't just come from me. That comes from the players. The players, again, these are very accomplished musicians, very versatile in their music, and their capacity is limitless. So
that must be a lot of fun for you when you have people with that kind of capability.
it's exciting. It's great. You know, we're even so. Trust me, Steve, we blow ourselves away once in a while when we listen to that story. What? Did we just write that?
That must be very fulfilling when that happens.
That's the greatest part about it. Yeah. It's better than performing.
Is the creation of it in the first place.
Oh yeah. Like it is, right? Remember, what do they always say? The journey is everything.
It is.
You know?
It's the journey. You never arrive or you're in trouble. If you arrive,
Right.
You're in trouble.
Yeah. That's it.
So as you're either coming up with an idea to then take into an improvisational state, or you're in the middle of doing it, are you at all considering the audience and what impact it will have on them? Or is it you're really writing for yourself and performing for yourself? How much does the audience come into your thinking?
They're in my thinking all the time, because yes, there's certain things that you want to take them on a journey inside a piece of music. And audiences have changed. They're not as simplified as people used to make them out to be.
Oh no, the audience is really smart.
Yes, and they know. So you just want to take them on a journey. You want to make it interesting. You want to make it somewhat comprehensible, if that's the right word.
Sure.
If I take it too far, I'm thinking, will they grasp on? I don't want their opinion necessarily, or their approval, but I want to create a nice thing for them, an active thing, in a mood, and I'm hoping I can take them on the journey. Because when we put something together, sometimes we're so excited about it, man, people are going to dig this, we'll say that to ourselves. And that's really, we know, that's when we kind of know we might be on the right track.
Because you trust in your tastes being reflective of what the audience's tastes will likely be.
Yeah. And performing this stuff too is very challenging. If I had to go out and do this, and luckily we've been in a pandemic, not luckily, I shouldn't say that. There's been a lot of players that have been close to hand, but for us to put something together here, and we're getting ready to do that, you're talking about a 7-8 piece group that has to provide for this huge landscape of sound that we create, and get it rehearsed, get it on the road. And we know that if we did provide a stage performance, we already know that people will be very accepting of it and very thrilled to see it and hear it.
What would you say? And my imagination is running wild right now because of the fact that you do this so improvisationally, but what would you say are the biggest challenges of live performance? What is the thing that always gets the biggest, most of your attention, and what are those challenges?
Well, the audience will be there to come and hear you. That's number one. You're hoping in this business that you got a good audience that's there for the right reasons. So the biggest challenges, I believe, are the sound checks. Okay, getting prepared, getting the instrumentation right, getting microphone settings, all that. It's a lot of work. I've always been a guy that's when I've put together a stage performance or stage show, it took a lot of rehearsal to get there. I didn't want to leave anything to chance, even though the music isn't almost entirely chance, So it's,
So everything else has to work in order to leave you the freedom to take the chance on stage.
the mechanics got to be there, man, or else it could turn pretty ugly pretty fast.
Well, if all your mics were turned off at the same time, that would be a problem.
Yes, something as simple as that. Something as simple as feedback. Something, or maybe the stage setup wasn't right, or we're too loud on this or with that. You always have the engineers are susceptible to things.
Mm-hmm.
These are sound engineers. Sometimes we don't even know who they are. They come in. They're very good at running councils.
Can you think of something that really went wrong during a performance and what you did to overcome it?
Yeah, power outage.
Power outage.
Yeah, I mean, or massive feedback, and they can't get control of that. Once in a while, I can remember quite a few years ago, we just had to stop until they got it right, and that's not good for your audience.
No, that's very hard on their liking or disliking something just because things don't work right.
Yeah, and they're very sympathetic to that usually, unless it's really something that's really taking too much time to get back on track.
Do you have a typical pre-show ritual aside from getting everything set up right? What do you go through before a show?
Personally, let's say I have a very I'm a very ritualistic person. I have to get up. I have to do my usual. I have to make sure that I practice for the day, that's ready to go. I'll make sure that I've got a good practice session in before I do, go to rehearsal or go to performance. Preparing for the show, I make sure that we're not doing any type of stimulants for me anyways. My players, I don't involve them. They're not sitting there, smoking a joint or whatever before they're going on or whatever. So we have to have total control of our faculties.
When you say stimulants, are you talking about like coffee as well, that kind of thing?
No, coffee. I can see a guy, we get some coffee. What I'm talking about is drugs.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot. And all the players I know, we can't play high. It's there are a lot of players that do, but no, we have to be
drunk.
Well, yeah, high, drunk. Like I said, that's what I mean by a stimulant.
High.
So yeah, I mean, we got to be ready to respond to each other musically. So yeah.
So what have you learned over the years from live performance that you learned over time worked really well and that you always seek or repeat?
You got to have a schedule. You got to be disciplined. You got to be disciplined before you hit the stage. And that's just, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, stuff like that. But I don't actually, if you think about it, there's a little bit of fear,
mm-hmm.
apprehension.
So you're going to have a little bit of adrenaline.
Yeah, that's a better word for it. The adrenaline, you got to control it. I mean, there's excitement about playing live, but there's, you can also think too much of yourself, maybe, one time or another. Now, you want to try to come across with humility, compassion, with passion, and park the ego at the door, so to speak, and let the music just serve itself and serve those. The servitude of others is more important.
What's your favorite thing about performing live? What is it that you just love every time?
The response, your audience interaction. When you're looking at that, people maybe out in the audience and stuff, you see that they're really, they're into it, or they appreciate the dynamic that you're dealing with. And those are the great moments. You can't have a performance unless you have a two-way street. The music, the audience come back.
Have you done live performance that was then recorded and put out?
I believe there's been nothing on CDs. You got to understand that our gigs were far and few between.
Right.
I believe that they recorded some stuff that we did at the Park West. I used to do some big college shows because we belonged to, I forgot the name of the organization, where my manager, Bill Badschool, would have us go around the country doing concerts for colleges.
Mm-hmm.
So they have recorded videotape, things
No,
like
no, I'm talking about where somebody set up a recording of the show so that you could release it later, that kind of thing.
No, we didn't do anything for release, but yes, we've been recorded, but they keep it, whatever they do.
Well, you and the Grateful Dead.
Yeah, probably.
And Fish.
Yeah, Fish. Well, you're talking some good people there. Boy.
Oh, well, it's just superior. But all right, so I ask lots of creators this question, which is, what for you, it's sometimes an unusual answer I get, which is, what for you makes a good piece of music good? Why are you attracted to a certain thing as opposed to not? What makes it good?
It's a preference, it's a personal preference. I mean, listening to it, if I was listening to another song from another artist or something, is that what you're saying?
Could be that you say that really is, I can identify with something that is, this is good or great, however you want to look at it.
Oh, there's so many artists, man, that I've listened to. Hell, I'll surf YouTube for sometimes an hour and a half straight, just picking up on all these groups and people that are putting it out now because of the technologies. It's just totally amazing. I'm listening to people, trios and quartets and different combinations of instruments and stuff, and I'm inspired almost every time I turn on the YouTube channels and stuff. I'm like, wow, man, I never thought of it. Wow, I'd like to play something like that,
So it sounds to me like it's something that for you to identify it as good, or in your point of view, from your point of view, good, it has to touch you in some way. It has to impact you in some way. You have to feel it.
Yeah, that's why maybe that's why people listen to certain people, and it's a form of quiet approval.
Mm-hmm.
It's behind the scenes. Like we just talked about. I had no idea what streaming and all this stuff that's going on. I don't know why I'm sitting with the record that's in the top 10, whatever it is, streaming and downloads. Somebody must be listening, like you said before, and they must be hearing something that pleases them or that excites them. There's some people that just can't, there's a lot of people, like, I don't have a preference. I don't mind, but I'll use I don't like a lot of certain ethnic things. Like, I'm not good on listening to a polka song from beginning to end.
Right.
It's not something I would keep on. Now, I'm not knocking, trust me, anybody out there.
It's just not your cup of tea.
Yeah, it's so. But yeah, I mean,
every genre is not for everybody.
No, you're right, and that's the point. So
I want to talk about teaching. You've done a little teaching over time, yes?
Yes, we used to do little clinics after a show or something, down at maybe some of the universities or colleges. So we would have a little, what they call master class. And I don't consider myself a master, but yeah, I've done teaching. Yeah.
And it's not the one-on-one that you had with the masters. It's more of a master class, or there are a group of people at one time, or do you do one-on-one?
No, mostly it was master classes. I do a jazz performance or something. Let's say if I've done something at the college or at the high school, I always ask Bill, my manager, I said, can you book a class afterwards? Because a lot of young people want to know about jazz and improvisation and stuff like that. So that's what I used to do.
Mm-hmm.
So
is it well, so you're not teaching a class that's this week and 10 weeks worth of classes. It's usually one-offs.
One-offs, what it is. You're right. Yeah.
Is there anything particular that you concentrate on in those one-offs, or do you just like to take whatever they want to do? Do you go with their flow?
Well, let's say it's a flute player, and he's there because he wants to learn to improvise jazz. or something like that. Or it could be a bunch of students that want to learn simple jazz things, or to understand a tune, let's say by Miles Davis, or, I try to get that tune worked up with my band, and then we'll have them come up, improvisation, making them realize that all mistakes are not necessarily mistakes. It depends how you treat that mistake, because it's in a moment now, right? So it's like Miles Davis used to always say, hey man, quit playing the butter notes. What he's saying is, he's going, play something that's coming from inside you, not what's expected or what's on a chart that, it's already been recorded. So I think the biggest thing for me was improvisation. How do you guys do this would always be the question. If the guy was a saxophone player, a young kid, or a flute player, or a piano player, we just have them come up and start getting involved. So this is how we do this. This is, if we're on B flat, major seventh chord, what kind of notes can we blow over on that chord? Things like that. So
we're back to the concept of there's no substitute for doing it.
Exactly. Oh yeah. Got to do it.
You can't read about what you do in a book. You can read the surface of it, but you can't do what you do by reading a book. You have to actually physically do it.
Yeah, you got to play. It was like I was on about that Jim Masters show.
Sure.
Yeah, so I'm doing that. I think it was last week. And a lady writes in, or he has a clip thing that goes across the bottom. She goes, "Boy, I would really love to get back to my poetry," And she goes, "I haven't written poetry in a long time because I love writing poems and poetry." And she says, is there anything that, how do you stay inspired was the question, how do you maintain? I go, the first thing you should do is, I said, I'm not a poet, so I can't appreciate everything that you possibly could do. But there's one thing you can do. If you think you want to get back to something, pick up the very thing that will allow you to do it again. You know what I mean? Which means you pick up the pen, I pick up the flute, So no matter how bad it sounds, there's a lot of days, man, I sound horrible. My wife puts up with some of the worst playing you have ever heard in your life. She's a saint. She's been listening to this stuff for 28 years of my life. She's heard every bad note that can possibly be made on the instrument.
Well, you can't get better at anything. I don't care what it is, whether it's being a scientist or a doctor or a lawyer or a musician. You can't get better at what you do without doing it and making some errors. And
absolutely,
you have to fail to get good, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, you gotta drop your face down in the dirt once in a while and just shake it off and get back up. And it's, in music, that's not major, but like, in firefighting, you're talking leadership things that got to get done, and that's a paramilitary environment.
But that's also true life and death. That's
exactly true. So,
you can't make too many real big errors in that field.
No. And, just the idea of, brushing yourself off and getting back in there and getting to the game, every day is not going to be great. In fact, the great super days are far between. If you looked at anyone's life in general and really assessed your life, I could say that I've had some great days, but there's been a lot more rough ones.
Well, I think that's true for virtually everybody.
That's right. And, the sooner you look at that and admit to yourself that this, life's not easy, but
no,
happiness is there.
But I've long maintained, and I think you'll agree with me, that you don't know what the good days are without the rough days, and you don't know what the rough days are without the good days. Otherwise, it's all the same.
You're right. Yeah, because how can you compare if you don't have both?
You don't know what it's like to feel well if you don't get sick every once in a while.
Exactly. It's the same thing we say about like, if you can't make a mistake, when you make a mistake, you learn something. If I always do things that are right, well, you never learn anything. You just, it can't be, you got to have mistakes.
And that's back to the notion of it is one long journey, and the journey is going to have roads that you go down that aren't quite right.
Absolutely.
And then you find the right roads by going down the wrong road sometimes.
That's even more true. That's pretty exciting.
It is exciting, and especially what you do in terms of free jazz, avant-garde, improvisation, all the rest of it. So last two questions for you today, Michael. In all your experiences, can you share with us a story in which something happened that was weird, quirky, strange, offbeat, or maybe just plain funny?
Man, this fun thing is always, I don't know if it's quirky or funny. Well, it wasn't funny at the time, but
I have a feeling I'm going to like this. Go for it.
Well, we're going to play the Ocho Rios Jazz Festival. I can't remember what year it is, but we're getting there, and we have all the players. We got to get on the plane. We have all of our equipment, and we get there into what's the airport that's in Jamaica, or Montego Bay or some.
You would have to tell me. I've never been there.
I think whatever. So we're going there, and the whole journey was nothing but a wake up call. It was just crazy to meet all these people. But when we showed up, we landed. Well, we're waiting for all our gear and stuff because we have equipment and gear that's coming off, our instruments and things like that.
Right.
Well, the first thing that we knew this was going to be bad. First thing they do is, Mr. Mason, your rack, this is like a flight case. Right. It's got equipment in it.
Yeah.
Is we don't know where it went. I was like, what do you mean? I gotta play. Luckily I always have my flutes with me, so I didn't worry about that.
You carry them on the plane with you?
Yes, I don't. These flutes are too expensive. Gold flutes are not easy to come by. So so after that, we're like, okay, great. Now I don't have any gear to play with. So I hope they got something there. We don't even know if they're on AC power out where we're going. I know we're going to a good hotel, but so then we take the ride from Montego to Ocho Rios. This is like a dirt track, with these guys that drive like maniacs. I mean, they're just, we're holding on to dear life. We're sitting in there. We got 5 guys. I think my future wife was with me. I just had proposed to her. So we're hanging on for dear life. And they're passing, like flammable fuel trucks. And there's no room for error. It's a one-way, if somebody doesn't move over to go to the other way. So that was pretty hairy. And, we were just glad to kiss the ground at the Ocho Rios Hotel there, which was a huge complex. I would say that was a pretty crazy experience. And we never found my stuff.
Really?
Well, yeah, Delta, whoever it was, they made these empty promises. Hey, fill out this paperwork. Eventually, you'll get to your house. Oh, thanks a lot. Never saw it.
Never saw it. You lost it forever.
Lost it forever. I think they sent me a check 5 years later.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Really, what's this?
So, all right, well, that's the way it works on the road sometimes, I assume.
Yeah, it's not good.
No. So last question for you today, Michael. Can you share with us a tip for anyone who's just starting out in the business, or maybe they're in a little bit and trying to get to the next level? What solid piece of advice or a tip might you have for them?
Everything that we talked about, which is passion, love what you do, go out and do it, because it's still a learning curve for me. And if I was telling anybody, they probably have a better understanding of the music industry the way it is today than I do. And you're looking at an old timer, 60s guy, and you got to be influenced by people. You can't do it by yourself. And seek out some incredible mentors, meaning people that you can trust, but have been doing it for a long time. If you're a musician, if you want to be a recording engineer, well, start going down to the recording studios, ask them if you can get in time, just sit in or whatever, you're not touching a dial. But if you're a musician, find good teachers, find mentors. I wasted probably a good 2 years. Now, it's great to do self-exploration, but at some point you need guidance, and you need to look for that guidance, and the guidance you look for, try to make it the best people that you can find. It's like when I sat with James Newton, he was a great one of the greatest jazz flute players of all time. I was up in New Mexico, and he allowed to have me come up. And I was up there for 10 days in the mountains with him, just playing flutes. And he inspired me tremendously. You have to be inspired by somebody, but to get into it, just get into it. just do it.
Just do it.
Yeah.
Well, Michael Mason, this has been just a terrific hour full of inspiration and great thoughts about how to be a musician and a composer, especially a flute player. And I can't thank you enough for coming on with me today on StoryBeat.
I can't thank you enough, Steve, for even pursuing this crazy guy.
So now, as promised, we have some beautiful music to end the show. So won't you sit back, please, and enjoy Michael Mason's exquisite composition, Gates to Raga, from his CD, Human Revolution. And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.